Paul goes on in verse 5, he says, "For although there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords." Going back to the whole idea of Genesis 6. Going back to Psalm 82. God calls his counsel. There are beings in the universe that are not gods. They were supposed to all be servants of God, but they're not. Some of them have fallen. Some of them have rebelled, Satan being one of them. Sometimes they're called the Watchers, according to Daniel. There are many gods, and the word God is Elohim, and Elohim is used as a term for any spirit being. So there are many creatures, there are many beings in heaven and here on earth, but there's only one Yahweh. Some people might read chapter 8 and begin to wonder why does this matter to me? What does this have to do with me? How does this apply to my life? And you'll understand why when we read it. But we got to be careful that we don't fall into two very common pitfalls when it comes to our modern Western way of thinking. Sometimes we have what's called geographical snobbery. As Americans, we look at the world and we think that, the world should be like us, but the world is not like us. We're I'm not going to say this word right, I never do. We're an anathema. We're something odd. We're something strange. It's not normal. The United States is not what most countries were like. Now, granted, many countries in the world have emulated us now, but many people in the world still face, especially in Southeast Asia, still face idol worship. Idol worship is very common in Southeast Asia. And we're foolish to ignore their perspectives, and because they teach us some very valuable lessons. We also might suffer from what might be called historical elitism. We have a trouble sometimes of realizing that from history, we learn things. There's probably at least one generation that doesn't think they can learn anything from the older generation. That's not true. There's much to learn from the past. We think we're smarter than people from other times. I remember growing up and studying history, and throughout history they would always teach us that, we started as primitive people, we discovered things, and we've reached where we are today. But there's a lot of research being done, a lot of archaeological research being done, finding out that it was what's called the, I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it's before the flood, I'm not even, like I said, I'm not going to remember the name. If you watch the video, I'll put it on the screen. But there was the time before the flood, there was actually technology that we don't have today. Now, I'm not talking computers and cell phones and things like that. But I think talking about mechanical technology that they should not have had according to what we thought it was like. We did not start as primitive beings and progress to where we are. We progressed, we lost some of it, and now we've gained some of it back, but there's things we need to learn from our past. There was a Spanish-American philosopher named George Santayana who once said, and you'll probably hear of this quote, it's been quoted a lot, it's also been attributed to other people, but he was the one who originally said it in this form. He said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." I don't know about you, but there are many things in my past I don't want to repeat. I need to learn my lesson from the past. So we need to approach these verses with openness and humility. So let's go to 1 Corinthians 8. Let's start with verse 1. Paul says, "Now, concerning food offered to idols." Now, obviously, again, They wrote to him asking about food that was being offered to an idol. We know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. We all have knowledge, which is a good thing. I'm glad we have knowledge. I'm glad we got to make sure the right people in charge have the right knowledge, obviously. But we all have knowledge. It's a good thing to have. And we have it in different areas of our lives so that we complement each other. The danger in having knowledge, though, is that we have it has a tendency to make us arrogant. We know things. We think we know things more than other people know things. And sometimes we do. There's no doubt that there are things that I know that others don't, but there's also things that others know that I don't. So we have to be careful that our knowledge does not make us arrogant, does not puff us up. It does not make us better than those who do not know. And while knowledge is good, love is better. He goes on in verse 2, he says, if anyone imagine that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. There are those who believe they have complete understanding in everything that they have knowledge of. But in reality, they're lacking true insight. You know, there are people who have knowledge about how to do something, but if you brought them in and had them do it, they would not be able to do it. They can tell you how to do it, but they have no idea how to do it. You know the old adage, when you're trying to teach someone something, watch me do. Okay? When I'm building something, I want my kids to watch me do it. And then when we build the next thing, I want them to build it with me. We both do. And there needs to come a time where I step back and say, you do it. If that happens, if they can build it, then that means that I have good knowledge, I know how to do it, and I know how to teach it. You want to know whether you know something well enough? Teach it. If you can't teach it, you don't know it well enough. But see, a little bit of knowledge leads to an inflated sense of self-assurance. There's actually a term for this. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where a little bit of knowledge leads to an overestimation of their competence. Election time's coming up. There are a lot of people who know what it's like to be in government. They know how the government runs. That does not mean that they're the right person to lead the country. There's a lot of people who've been in government and been in governments for a long time, their whole life, 40 plus years, 40, 50 years. That does not mean that they are the right ones to run the government. We have to approach our faith and our interactions with others with humility and a willingness to learn. It's important to prioritize love and consideration over others more than merely exercising our abilities and our freedoms. We have to balance our knowledge with love. I'll just tell you a story. Yesterday, Caleb and Abigail and I are at Lowe's, and we're getting a cartload of wood. I'm talking lots of wood. 18 pieces of 2x4, 10 2x6s. And it's all stacked on the cart. I stacked it on there so it would stay. And so we're out there, we're getting ready to load it on the truck, and they move it the wrong way, and the wood falls off the cart. Now what do? Do I get angry? No. I was surprised how unangry I was. I said, do you see what happens when you don't listen to each other? And Caleb picked up a piece of wood and started moving. Abigail didn't have it yet, and it almost landed on her foot. And I said, you see, if you're not working together, if you're not caring for the other person you're working with, if love is not your overarching aspect of a job that you're doing, you run the risk of hurting somebody. I saw the workers inside Lowe's smiling as I was saying those things, because I'm sure their bosses have told them the same thing. We have to approach everything we do with humility. We have to balance our knowledge with love, ensuring that our actions reflect both wisdom and compassion for others who are in our community. Paul says this in verse 3. He says, "But if anyone loves God, he is known by God." See, love for God is more important than whatever knowledge I have. I could have a head full of theological, expositional knowledge of Scripture. I could quote you the Scripture front to back. But if I have love, what good is it? If I don't have love, what good is it? If I don't love people, what good is it? It's worthless.